Well, this morning takes me to Alan Hyde's house. And Alan, you may know, is the one that has written the most comprehensive guide of trails for the entire Linville Gorge area. He's actually into his third printing now. And so I thought it'd be important to sit down with Alan and talk to him a little bit about Linville Gorge. So join me as we talk to Alan. Well, Alan, it's good to see you. It's been a while since we've hiked together.
Yeah, it's been about 2 years, I guess.
Well, Alan, there's a lot of people interested in what you've done here in the Gorge and how you generated this book. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to the Gorge the first time.
Well, actually, about 1969 or so, I had an uncle down in Rutherton, and he bought a piece of land up on Long Arm Mountain off the Joe Johnson Road, and he made a cabin there around 72 or 73, which was about the time. Well, I have to back up. He bought his lot, and they talked my father, his brother, into buying this lot back around 69 or 70, thereabouts. And then I moved to North Carolina in 73, and I got snookered into the educational system for about 4 years or so. And I finally ended up, after school, going to Hickory. And about that time, my father realized he wasn't going to do anything with his land, so he gave the land to me. And back then, it was like $1,000 an acre or something.
Wow.
I'm on, I think, 2.5 acres. It cost me like $3,000. And even back then, that wasn't much money. So anyway, back then, this place was a jungle. It was like the rhododendron 20 feet high and a few trees sticking out. Because they had timbered all this area back in the 50s and 60s, all the way down the river in some places, or almost to the river. So
Now, for people that don't know where you live, where are you juxtaposition to the Gorge?
in the northeast sector.
So it's right in your backyard.
Yeah, the gorge is about 150 feet that way.
Not a bad way to live.
In fact, the reason I built this house 3 stories high is so I could look across the gorge, but it took me 15 years to build the house. So by the time I was finished building the house, the forest had grown up 20 feet. So, except in the winter, I can't see the other side of the gorge.
Gotcha.
And as it turned out, my neighbor, whose land we had thought about getting, has a beautiful view of Grandfather Mountain over that way, but the only place I can see Grandfather from is my roof, and I'm not about to add another floor for that. I moved to Hickory in spring of '79, and I worked there about 2 years. I got this bright idea to go to graduate school, get an MBA and all this stuff. So I went back to, but before I went off to graduate school, I made a cinder block storage shed here, 12 feet by 16 feet by 2 stories. And thinking I'd store all my junk here, and then someday after I got out of school, I'd get a job someplace and have this place to come back to and make a house around it. And as it turned out, that was the beginning of the recession in '81, because I had thought, well, I'll get in this MBA course and I'll find a job down in the lowlands. Otherwise, we'd probably go on ASU. But I went to just about every employer in the Greensboro area, and you know, nice, interesting, but we're not interested basically. And I thought, well, if an MBA is not worth this much, why bother? Because I already had a Bachelor of Science in business. So after 2 semesters of job hunting, I thought, well, the heck with this stuff. I'm just going to move up here, get a job, and build a house. I went directly from MBA school to flipping burgers down in Morganton, and commuting. That's 56 miles round trip. So and of course, flipping burgers wasn't a good way of making a whole lot of money. So I was basically living out of my van, having an old '64 Chevy van, the bunk in it and stove and all that stuff.
Slick.
So I sort of lived out of that and worked on the house with what money I had, and with what money and time I had. So it took me, I think, a year to dig out the foundation, and another year to get the foundation. Goes 9 feet in the ground on the low side because I'm on a rock slope. So if it's level here, you go out 24 feet and you're down 9 feet to get back to rock again. And if one side's on rock, you've got to have the other side on rock to balance, to keep it stable. So I went about a floor a year, and somewhere in the mid 80s or late 80s I got up to the roof, and I made out of rough cut lumber. That's what took so long. The inside of all these beams is rough cut lumber, white pine, so I don't have a whole lot of faith in strength, so it's just about solid wood there. And this is all cantilevered. This is the wall, the foundation wall is actually underneath of this beam, and everything out beyond that beam is hanging over the edge. So there's a 6.5 foot overhang beyond the wall. And up here on the ridge, you have to worry about horizontal rain. So each floor, it's like a pagoda. Each floor gets higher and higher and wider and wider. So, and even with a 6.5 foot overhang, I still get rain on the windows sometimes.
So that's pretty interesting little engineering feat you put together.
Well, the price was, it took 15 years. I didn't have any money, so I made all my windows and doors and
Slick.
and like say I made the house out of rough cut lumber. So every board is a different dimension, and so like you make a floor, the beams, you've got to notch each beam so the top is level, and they're all tapered. They're typically, there's a 1/4 inch difference in height and thickness on each beam, so the other end automatically needs at least a 1/4 inch notched out of one dimension. And even with that much of a taper, you put a square on the end to cut it off, you're cutting it square to one side but not the other sides. But back then you could do that legally. Now they don't allow rough cut lumber, which is probably just as well.
Yeah.
And I did use some finished lumber on the inside, but that's another story. But I spent a whole 5 or 6 months making windows. These are all triple pane windows, and on this floor I've got a 4th pane on the outside to keep the wind out.
Wow.
The windows weigh 75 pounds apiece. 70 pounds.
Good
And there are a
Lord.
couple of windows upstairs that weigh 125 pounds, and you bang your head in one of those things, you know what you hit.
That's fantastic. So, you're up here, you're
Well-
building your place.
Well, yeah, I guess when I was building a house for 15 years, I didn't stop the hike or anything. Something like that, if you get offline, you lose momentum. So you have to keep going day after day after day. And I have a little bit of time off in January and February, but as it turns out, even in January, you get a week of mild weather like what we're having right now, where it's 60 degrees and you work outside comfortably. And went through a lot of layoffs and stuff like that back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I flipped burgers and worked on a jackhammer up on the Blue Ridge Parkway where the viaduct is.
Right.
The last segment of the parkway, maybe that's good in a way that I can say I worked on the Blue Ridge Parkway. That makes me a little bit more native than I would be otherwise. That was a tough job too.
I bet.
And then I worked for an electrical company for a while until they went out of business. And then I went back to Morganton. I actually got a job that had something to do with my degree for a while, but we had such high turnover that typically, I think we had about 7 or 8 people in the office, and by the time I'd been there a year, I was the last one standing. And that was the kind of
Gotcha.
turnover we had. So I finally worked my way up to the top, and I thought, well, the former controller and I were joking, well, this is good for 6 months. That's almost to the day. That's when they eliminated my job. So,
Jeez.
so I was back to being unemployed again. Then I worked as a machinist, and I finally got what I thought was a steady job at a hospital. And as it turned out, that was when they started cutting back on Medicare, I guess, in about 1990. So they were laying people off left and right above me. So I just decided I'm going to stay down here at this clerical level, because you live this far from a job, you're better off having a steady job than a high-paying job that you're going to get laid off from. So.
Sure.
And then my hip went bad in '99, so I quit my job and retired, basically. And I more or less sat around here for 2 years while my hip repaired itself, basically. And now I can walk 15, 16 miles a day.
I've seen you do it.
And, well, I've always had people walk up to the door and wonder, where am I? I'm lost. And it turns out they started Table Rock and they thought they were a mile up the road, and actually they're,
Yeah.
miles from Table Rock. And sometimes they'd come up in the middle of the night wondering where they were. So I eventually made a little map, and I just handed them at the door when lost people came by.
So your whole mapping experience started from lost people showing up
Yeah.
at your doorstep.
Well, I have to back up a little. Back in 1990, we have Galax pickers around here. Those,
Oh, yeah.
those little green leaves. And they use them in funerals, among other floral decorations. But anyway, we had some, it was January 1990, and we had one of these warm spells I was talking about. It was 60 degrees during the day, the kind of day you can walk around with a short sleeve shirt on.
Right.
Well, these two Galax pickers were working their way up on Ginger Cake Mountain on a 60-degree day, and the guy hung his jacket up on a tree, and when you're Galax picking, you're bending over, walking around in circles, so it doesn't take much to get disoriented. So this guy thought his car was over there, but it was actually over there on Table Rock Road. And they worked till dusk, basically, and of course it starts getting dark in the woods around 5:30. And in this particular case, there was a radical change in the weather. The wind started blowing in the late afternoon, and by the next morning, well, typically what happens, you have a warm front, the cold front comes in and you get all this rain. So by the next morning, it was 32 degrees and a heavy rain, and this guy was lost in the woods, and he had gone down towards the river from Ginger Cake Mountain through the underbrush. So they found his body in the spring in the river.
Oh,
Apparently he'd gotten down to the river, which would probably take an hour or two. And of course he's in the dark.
sure.
What he was doing when they picked Galax leaves, they picked 10 leaves, and the 10th one they tie a knot. So he had his duffel bag full of Galax leaves, and what he was leaving a little trail of Galax, clumps of Galax leaves as he went down the hill. So my uncle and I, there were several search parties up here, and we did our 10 cents worth walking around the trails. And I wasn't that familiar with these trails either myself, but and we found little clumps of leaves all the way down to below Henson Falls on our own. And then I guess when he was crossing the river, maybe in the dark, the water would have felt warmer than this cold rain coming down. I guess he just stayed in or got hypothermia. But anyway, he found his body down the river someplace.
Hmm.
And the guy was 10 minutes from the house. And I was thinking, well, we've got all these defunct hunting trails and animal trails around here, and if the trail was half decent, he wouldn't have gotten killed. And of course, meantime, I've had all these other people come by or lost. So I finished my house in '96, and was handing out these little maps of the local area. And then Chris Blake's book came out.
River Cliffs.
Yeah, I don't remember the date right off. I guess early 2000s. So I thought, and I saw his address. He lived in Linville, so I thought, well, I'll call him. And so we got together, and pretty soon we met Bob Underwood, or Chris might have already known Bob, I don't know. But we started talking about the missing links. So the official trail, the gorge, you've got the north and south trails on both sides, plus on the river. And on the north end, there's no way of making a connection. But there were 3 missing links. And as it turned out, one of the missing links was this trail from here to Linville Falls, this area. And I had already, after this Galaxer got killed, I had started to maintain the trails around here anyway. And I made a bigger map handout that showed all the missing links, so you could walk all the way around the gorge. But, we weren't trying to sell or anything, just handing them out, which is not a very effective way of spreading information. And so I thought, well, somebody really ought to write about the Linville Gorge. So I tried talking Chris into it, since he was the official author. He's got his master's degree in library science and all that stuff, but he wasn't interested. You try to write a book, all of a sudden you realize there's a huge amount of time. And of course, there's always going to be a mistake in it someplace that somebody's going to tell you about. So I thought, okay, I'll make an informal booklet. So I spent 5 or 6 months, I guess, free time, and printed it in March 2007, I think it was. And you know what I know about most of what I know about the gorge is in that booklet. So if you ask me a question that's not in the booklet, you may not get an answer. And almost every time I talk to somebody who has done any hiking all around here, I find out something I didn't know about before. Like I didn't know about that whole rock for a year or two anyway, after I got that booklet out. And somebody just told me the other day about another place. You go south on the Kistler Highway from Wiseman's View, and when you get down the bottom of the hill beyond Wiseman's View going south, there's a little pull off where you can park.
Right.
And there's a freshly cut trail that goes in the woods, and more or less the end of the trail is an upright rock or a rock formation. There's a hole like a window, car window.
Oh yeah, Window Rock.
The what?
Window Rock.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's new to me. I just found out about that in the past few months. The LimaGorge.net website at the library, you have to have a secret password or something. It just doesn't work. So that's one of my motivations to get a home computer, is to get into that and find out all the stuff I don't know.
Well, Alan, now that you've documented the gorge, what are you looking at next?
Well, I've been doing a lot of hiking over in Wilson Creek, and there are a lot of places to hike over to the east side of the gorge too.
Over in the valley?
Below the Blue Ridge Parkway.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Over towards, but not Black Mountain. Well, Black Mountain would be the far end of it, but within commuting distance here. What's the name of the town? With the arrowhead in the center of the
yeah.
town. Where Cato Holler lives.
Drawing a
mental
blank
on that. But anyway, there are a whole bunch of state parks below the parkway, and you can take all these trails up the parkway, which is 1,500, 2,000 feet, I guess. We did a lot of it last winter, and then you've got the Mountain Sea Trail over there. And all that stuff is lower than here. We're almost at 4,000 feet here, so if there's snow here, it may be just dampness down there, not even frozen. And over Wilson Creek, it's even lower. The valleys are down around 1,300 feet elevation, and the ridge lines are 2,800 feet. That makes a huge difference in the winter.
Sure.
And of course, the summer you don't want to be down there. You got the heat and the ticks and
Yeah.
humidity. Even in the gorge, there's a huge difference between this end and the south end. It can be a 20-degree difference between up here at 3,800 feet and down there at near Lake James level. And then, of course, at the south end of the gorge, all the hills face the sun
Sure.
at almost a right angle. And, of course, the ridges in the gorge on their south side, like you go Pinchin Trail, and you got that hot sun hitting in the morning at a right angle, and the heat wafts up. And Pinchin Trail, I think, if we don't have another forest fire anytime soon, it's beginning to get some shade on it.
Yeah.
So that may be better. And same with the Camber Branch Trail. The trees, when I was last down there 2 years ago, they were like shoulder height.
Right.
And I just talked with somebody the other day who maintains the Mountain Sea Trail in this area, and they're clearing up from Table Rock to Short Off right now. If you've been down there last year or two, it's getting pretty bad for stuff growing in the trail, and it's all little stuff you can't hit with a trail saw. You can use a bush axe, but some of that stuff it's too small to
Fights back.
Plus the ground is solid rock just about, so your bush axe can look like a battle axe very shortly. So they're working their way through that with clippers.
So, do you have a timeline on a third edition for your book, or
Well, the third printing of the
third printing?
booklet, I made, I think, 500 copies. That gives me another 2 years before I run out of copies. And even just doing a reprint is a lot of work, because I have to go through it and make sure everything's still there, and then like every time I get printed, the printer does something I don't like, and sometimes you just can't go back and say do it over again. It just doesn't work. So that's a financial risk as well as just a quality risk.
Sure.
And they always find something to add another 10%. Oh, we forgot the charger for this, and there's always this little 10% error. But that's very frustrating.
Yeah.
But if I have 2 years, it'll take me a year to write it, another year to put off writing it, I guess. And meanwhile, I'm collecting all those GPS points and just trail knowledge. Now, I'm going to have to do the whole Wilson Creek area over again, hiking wise on my own, because the people I hike with go real fast. We'll go 9 miles in 5 hours.
Yeah, that's pushing it pretty
And
fast.
on up and down stuff, you're moving pretty fast there. And they're all, I don't even invite other people to hike with, because I know they'll just get burned out after the first mile or two. And of course, then you see somebody who's 30, 40 years younger, and it doesn't seem like you're accomplishing that much. But, or like when they had the forest fire here, they had some fire crews in here. All these guys are built like Paul Bunyan, 6'2", 6'4", 200 pounds, muscle like Charles Atlas or something. And that's sort of, you feel pretty puny when you see those guys. But, and they're carrying like a 70-pound pack and a chainsaw or something. It's just intimidating. But
Yeah.
give those guys credit for what they do. I think hiking in the trails after the forest fire, you could see where they had to go down the Pinchin Trail or down from the Pinnacle, and they have to worry about getting burned out. So, and meanwhile, they're carrying a saw, and that was in the late spring. It's hot and humid, and of course
Yeah.
the fire itself is putting a lot of heat and smoke, and it's incredible.
It's an amazing job they do. I hope we can go a few years without them ever having to do that job again.
Yeah. And well, back to the book, I hope to have an introduction to Wilson Creek, and I'll have the maps and maybe a mention of other places nearby. Actually, there are parts of Wilson Creek that are just as scenic as the gorge. It's steep, but it's not bare rock. I guess that's the real difference.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of waterfalls and things like that. If you like crossing streams, that's the place to go. Some of the people I hike with, they've got these boots for crossing streams. They've got like screen on the side so the water just squishes out. And in summertime, that's okay. I'm a dry foot person. I'm not in the river crossing more than I have to. It's just, a nuisance to take your boots off and dry them
Sure.
off and all that stuff. But one of the girls I hike with, she has these screen boots, and like we hiked up the side of Mount Mitchell last year, a year before, and we started down near the bottom, and I don't know, it was like 5, 6, 7 miles, something like that. And we had to go up to the top and then all the way up to the parkway and then back down again. And first thing she did was just walk through a stream and let the water squirt over. And usually you think, well, you're going to ruin your feet on the beginning of a 6 or 7 mile hike, but she knows the combination of socks and boots and all that stuff. She knew what she was doing.
I'd wind up with a foot full of blisters.
Yeah, back from Boy Scout days, I wouldn't even try something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I do take care of extra pair of socks, but that's a different mode of hiking. And of course, some people get into buying all the gear and stuff, and I'm just sort of old-fashioned and cheap. I wear my Walmart safety boots, and that's good enough for most things. And actually, around here, most trails are so short, the extra weight doesn't catch up with you if you're used to.
Sure.
Of course, I ever start wearing light boots, and I never go back to heavy boots because it feels so much heavier then. But for a few miles, it's not that much extra weight. Speaking about people I've met hiking around Gorge, I've run into a person by the name of Travis Proctor. He's 72 right now. He can hike like a 20-year-old. But the first time he was in the Gorge was, I think, 1956 or something like that.
Really?
Back before they had a lot of these trails. And one of his stories is when he was 16, he and a friend hiked down the river to Lake James in under 12 hours. But the way he did it, he went down the river, and
Yeah.
that's a whole lot slower than going on a trail. I think he said the trail started down around Conley Cove or something like that. But he,
Does he live in this area now?
yeah, he's always lived within, I guess, 20 miles a year. Now he has a cabin 100 yards off Blue Ridge Parkway up here near the Lost Cove
Great.
overlook. But one of his stories, he's also a hunter, or was a hunter, and he was hunting down around Cambric Branch, and it turned dark on him, and he's carrying a rifle, which is kind of hard to carry through underbrush, but the top end of Cambric Branch it's a very steep V, and somewhere along the line he ran into a fissure in a rock with air coming out of it. I think he said about 1.5 feet in diameter, and he could feel the air blowing out of the ground. And he had passed a little cave down below there someplace. Someday he wants to go back there and try to light a fire to see whether the smoke comes up through the hole or not. But another person whose ancestor used to live in the gorge, he had told me he was bear hunting down there once, trying to keep up with his bear dogs, and he went past the cave, and his memory is a little dim now. When he first told me about it, he remembered rails, like railroad car rails, coming out of
No kidding.
the cave, and that was up opposite Pinchin, which is about where Cambric Branch is.
But they could be the lost slave.
Later on, he said, "Well, I'm not sure about those rails." So, but he did remember this cave, but he had to go by to keep up with his dogs. And you hear all these lead mine stories around here. It's almost a fact that there was some sort of lead mine up north of here, somewhere, I guess, within a mile or two of the falls. That's one of the stories. These people keep telling, well, I know where, I used to go down there with my father or whatever, and then they say, well, I'm not in good enough shape to go down there. Of course, the trees have all grown up. All that area was timbered off in the 50s and 60s. So that's one story. And then another story I got from somebody whose ancestors lived in the gorge told about a person that married an Indian girl, and somewhere along the line he had a disagreement with his Indian girlfriend, so she went back to her tribe and badmouthed them. And there was a lead mine supposedly down Table Rock, Cambric Branch area, and he'd gone up there to get some lead, and later on people found his body parts hanging from a tree. So apparently the in-laws had something to say with him about about his relationship as well as the lead. And then of course the other lead mine stories down around Pinnacle, there was a square mile of land that somebody apparently gotten as a grant, and that's Dellinger Chimney is in one corner of that lot. And some of the lot is on the east side of the river, and there may or may not be a lead mine or a vein of lead near some place. The erosion's so fast, all that stuff can get covered over pretty quickly. There was a time the state of North Carolina would give you a land grant if you had iron and you produced so many pounds of iron per year for so many years, that they'd give you about a square mile of land, and maybe they had something for lead mines back then. Now, when I was researching this booklet, I read a geologist report, and he said the next time somebody tells me about a lead mine, I'm going to punch him in the nose. So that tells you something about the lead mine stories. But there are zinc mines or zinc deposits around here. On one of the older maps, there's a shovel and pickaxe symbol for a mine. It says zinc on it, which is over there on the far side of above Route 221. And I've never run into it. And then they had some uranium diggings over in Wilson Creek, and uranium turns into lead. So actually one of my neighbors suggested if you want to find a lead mine, get a Geiger counter, and maybe you can pick up a trace of radioactivity from any remaining
Sounds logical.
uranium. Yeah, well, he's a logical kind of person, so but I hadn't thought of that. But lead, zinc, uranium, and of course there's a lot of iron around here, but with the exception of Cranberry mines, it's not worth mining.
We had heard from someone on LinvilleGorge.net that asked about gold deposits in this area. Have you ever heard any tales about gold?
Actually, I've heard somebody a couple of years ago was telling about the pawn shop down in Morganton that they sold a certain amount of underwater equipment like wetsuits and stuff.
Right.
And somebody went in there and bought 2 wetsuits, and the guy said, "Where are you going to use them?" He said, "We're going to look for gold in the Leadville River." So I don't know if he found any or not, but he must have thought there had been some.
I know there's people prospected in Wilson's Creek.
Yeah, down at the foot of the mountain, there are actually about, I think something like half the slaves in Burke County back before the Civil War were used for lead mining or gold mining, and that included down where Lake James is at the mouth of this river.
Wow.
And then they did a lot of panning for gold down on below Wilson Creek. So there must be a little bit of gold up here. But,
Yeah.
but what they were doing, they were digging up the riverbank and
Sure.
sluicing it and all that stuff, and a major industrial operation for back then. But there were several hundred people involved in mining. Of course, then you go south and you go to Beckler's Mint and Rutherford area. There's a lot of gold. In fact, my aunt had a 400-foot deep well in Rutherford, and one day one of the Johns had a leak or something, and it dried out the well. So we let the well fill up overnight, and the next day we blew out the lines because all the silt in the bottom. And I filled up a glass and let it sit. And the next day I looked at it, and you can see all this gold glittering in the water. But of course, the problem is 400 feet of hard rock and maybe a little bitty vein of gold in there. But
Yeah.
there is gold in them hills. That's the other side of it.
Oh, that's great.
But
What-
I'm not aware of any gold veins up here. And you look at the rock, and it just doesn't look suitable for gold.
Anybody else comes to mind? The characters you've come across in your stay, life up here?
Well, Travis is my guru for trail knowledge and animal knowledge. We were hiking up the side of Mount Mitchell the other day, and he just had spotted something through the woods.
Mm-hmm.
So when we came back down from this little 3,000-foot climb, we went over to what he had seen. It turned out there was a big rock ledge, I guess maybe 15 feet from the bottom of the rock to the ground, and somebody had built like a shack in there. And the boards were there, and it used this insulating stuff to seal all the edges so the mice couldn't get in. It had a little concrete foundation, and I guess the room was about the size of this room, maybe 150 square feet, something like that, and a dirt floor, trash all over the place on the inside. But it was only maybe 100 feet, 150 feet off the trail, a big, well-used trail. And all we think it was that guy bombed the abortion clinic.
Rudolph.
Yeah, Eric Rudolph. But that was the sort of thing you'd expect. And they planted a couple of hemlock trees in front of it so you couldn't see and in summer you wouldn't see this thing from the trail, but
Sure.
Travis just keeps his eyes glued, and he has really good eyes, so he sees this stuff.
hunting.
And of course, he was a hunter, so he's real observant. And the 2 other girls that hike with us a lot, they're in plants, and they see these little tiny flowers 20 feet off the trail.
yeah.
Oh, well, gotta go over and look at that. And meanwhile, we're hiking at 2 or 3 miles an hour so.
Well, now, speaking of hiking, how often do you get into the gorge?
Actually, well, my mailbox is a third of a mile that way, and on the way back, I come through the corner of the gorge. So you could say, in one sense, I'm in the gorge every day. But
Well, how about
I go up sitting
officially
there
hiking?
about twice a week.
Oh,
Well, a little bit less than that. I get over a year. I guess it averages about once or twice a week, and that's 3 miles in the gorge. And I keep the trails pretty well beaten down in that direction. And this is. Since I started writing the booklet, I do all the trails in the gorge twice a year. That's the way it works out. There are 1 or 2 little sections I might not do, but like I just went from Spence Ridge down to Short Off last Wednesday, and that's the second time I've done that this year. And that was the only part I really hadn't done, major section I hadn't done.
well, if you had to narrow it down, what's your favorite section of this gorge in general?
Well, in a car, at this time of year, driving down the Kistler Highway
Yeah.
in the afternoon, the sun hits all those rocks and cliffs on the west-facing side, and that's pretty spectacular. And in walking, if you go from the south end of the Rock Jock Trail, you get that same show, except you've got 3 hours of walking to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And of course, you can look, you know, you can spend your life exploring all those canyons below the Rock Jock. It'd be nice if they could extend it from the overlook, Wiseman's View, to Dobson's Knob, but you're gonna have to wait for the woods to get higher.
Yeah. The fire's gonna
And I
damage.
enjoyed coming up the river, especially the south end, south of Pinchin. You don't see too many people down there. We tend to make like an annual pilgrimage to the Daffodil Flats. A couple of years ago, we went through there in January like this, and the flowers were blooming, which is, I guess, there's enough underground water to keep the ground from freezing up, so the daffodils come out without a whole lot of excuse. And that's isolated, and of course you can always, and it's pretty flat, which is nice too. So there are a lot of places to explore down there. It's just a really nice piece of river. One of the most fun hikes I've done in recent years, we started from Lake James and came up that connector trail on the west side. I've forgotten the name, the Linville River Connector Trail or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a blue dot on the fence right on 126, halfway between the Linville River Bridge and old Wolf Pit Road.
Mm-hmm.
You go up that trail 2.5 miles, you get to the river. And once we got that point, we kept on going up the river. And when we got up just a little bit north of Dellinger Chimney, we went straight up towards the base of Shortoff.
Mm-hmm.
And all that vegetation had burned off, so you don't have to go through the bushes and stuff. And we sweated it out, but we finally got to the top of the cliffs, because that's the trick, is to find some way to get to the top. And the map was, the official map was no use for finding a way to the top. Once you get up there, you can see places you can get up. And it's not half as dangerous as you might think. From here, looking down the gorge, it looks like if you're going up this hill, if you slip, you'd kill yourself. But you get down there, and up near the top, it gets steep enough. If you fell, you'd probably fall 20 feet, or roll 20 feet. But most of it's safe enough to do as a practical matter. And that was a real fun hike. And then walking along the base of Shortoff, there's a little trail at the base, so you can walk along that and follow a contour. And of course, all those rock formations are real interesting.
Yes.
And before the Russell Creek Trail burned out, we used to. That's an enjoyable trail. It's tough, but it's enjoyable, and you can do it in the middle of the winter because it faces the south, just like a reflector of it. And you can get down in a short sleeve shirt, and if it's 35 here, it'd be 45, 50 plus the sun, so you can be down in a short sleeve shirt even in January down there. But that burned out, now it's a jungle, and it'll be another year or two, I guess, before you can recut the trail, and it'll stay there without getting filled in with underbrush.
Yeah, the briars do seem to take advantage of any sunlight.
But there are a lot of interesting rock formations down there. Of course, all over the gorge are interesting rock formations. And Chris Blake has told me about an old trail he found on the Linville River going up to those overlooks. The only catch was, he said, well, there's one place you got to hang on to something, and if you fall, you're going to get splattered down the rocks. I lost some of my interest in checking out the trail anytime soon. But he had started from Pine Gap, went up the west side of the river, and apparently he's cleaned up that trail a little bit, and then there's this little ledge you have to get. It's just a one little tight spot. Of course, that's all it takes. I haven't seen it, so it may not be that dangerous, but then again, it's a long walk back if you have to walk back. Yeah, I've walked all the way up the Brushy Ridge right down here, so I've walked up the river, along the river on the east side, which is sort of fun. And there's a little bit of a fisherman's trail in places. And about halfway up, maybe a mile less than a mile downriver from the falls, there's a steel shaft sticking out of the river.
Really?
And I guess there's a big gear on the other end. And apparently a sawmill or something must have washed out and all this stuff blew over the falls.
It's amazing what you do find downstream after a big blow like that.
And there's the river, the river bank's a whole lot cleaner than they used to be. It used to be when I would go upriver or go to one of these trails up to the falls, there'd be rubber tires and all this stuff. And I don't know whether they got blown out or not. Mike Fisher, sir, my neighbor, the one who worked for Outward Bound for about 20 years, he's taken his kids in there a couple times, and they've carried out tires and stuff like that. There's a limit to how much you can do. And then once in a while we do get a hurricane that blows a lot of stuff down to Lake James, so that's their problem down there now. But even now there's still a lot of junk where the debris piles up. Hiking boots, and officially this is an unfinished attic,
Ah,
in case you're wondering.
got a workbench and everything.
This was supposed to be the kitchenette over here, and a little dining table over here, and the living room was out there, and then I had a master bedroom. The ugly side of the house. When I first cut it in half, it looked pretty rough because I just had bare metal. My neighbor had a tin roof and he took it, slap it on there. When I was cutting it in half, I really didn't care too much about looks.
Now tell me why you cut it in half.
Well, that goes all the way back to LBJ, Great Society. It's a long story, but that's part of it. The Great Society, all that stuff was being covered by federal taxes. And then when Reagan was elected, they tried to eliminate a lot of stuff. So they dumped it back on the state. The state dumped it back on the county. And all of a sudden the property tax went way up. And I was about halfway finished the house then. And I thought, well, I'm not going to work a month a year to pay for the Great Society, because I assumed that it was just going to keep building and building. And I had a really low-paying job then, so I didn't have a whole lot of money to throw around anyway. That's part of it. But as it turned, I didn't realize, but that was happening all over the country. So all the county commissioners in the country practically got wiped out the next election. So that was the end of that big tax increase. But when I was saying I went from graduate school to flipping burgers, one of the people I worked next to, I'm up here living out of my van building a house, and he was living in a subsidized apartment with his girlfriend. And there are a couple of communities of these subsidized apartments, very nice garden apartments, and he's down there same as me, but he's living in his subsidized apartment, which I am paying for while I'm building a house. So I'm thinking, well, there's something wrong here. And of course now, 25 years later, I'm thinking, well, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to cut it in half because taxes are going to go up and inflation is going to go up. So, maybe things will turn around, but over the years, it just gets a little bit worse each year. On the front, I cut 1/3 off. There's about a 12 or 14 foot section on the front I cut off, and then on the back side I cut 2/3 off, and in the garage I cut it all the way down to ground level. So they tax you on square footage. When I cut it in half, the building inspector saw if you have more than so many feet from your door to the first part of the building, you have to have a second door. So that was fine. I had a garage door, but he said the old garage door came up, and he said, well, that won't work. You have to have it like this, open up, and of course the wind and snow blowing through that wouldn't work. So I thought, well, I just cut the garage in half. So I took the doors down and cut them to make it fit in there. 20 years ago I cut the street down because it got two right next to it. And you would expect a white pine to die, but apparently it's tied in with this tree here. So this tree took over the roots of this tree.
It's healed up.
Yeah. But I didn't know that was possible.
I've never seen it before.
All these hybrid chestnuts growing in here. Hang on their leaves forever in the fall, so you have to really worry about a forest fire.
How many of the hybrids have you got?
Oh, that's a good question. At least I've got 7 down here. I've got 2 Chinese chestnuts up there. Chinese chestnuts are male and female, so you have to have 3 to be safe, generally speaking. I've got some white walnut trees up there. They grow 6 feet a year, given the opportunity. And that's the backside. 2/3 of the backside got cut off. And that skylight up there, it used to be part of my living room up there on the 3rd floor. And yes, it's a little difficult to wash the windows on the 2nd floor.
I can imagine. Okay.
With all the insulation on the house, 3 logs will keep the house warm for a day, usually. It's about 15 pounds. And in January, sometimes when it doesn't get above 20, 25 during the day, I may use 6 logs altogether. And so this pile of wood here, that's good for 2 years. The shovels I wore out when I dug the foundation out for the house and just work around the house. And I'm working on my 2nd pick handle right now and my 4th shovel.
So the museum of the construction, huh?
Yeah, I thought I got a lot of work in there. I'm not just going to throw them out. There's a Fisher Papa Bear. Yeah, I'll get that on. And that's, I was telling you about, I used to live near a junkyard. That's steam pipe. That's 1/4 inch thick steel.
And
So
you're
if there's a
using
flue fire, I'm not too worried about it because I've seen it orange before, but that's just when I was playing with it. But I'll put 3 of these logs in here. There's enough wood for about a month, like January. And you would be amazed how much better wood burns when it's been next to the fire for a couple of weeks. And when I bring this stuff in the fall, you have to sit there and keep putting paper and get going. And now when it's dry, I just put the wood in there and light it, and it takes off like a scalded dog.
And now your pipe goes up through the house,
Yeah,
and
this is,
it's a radiator.
That's about a 38-foot flue, if I remember right. When it gets going, I have this thing almost totally closed off to keep it from getting too hot. And even then it'll get up to 500 or 600 degrees. And if I'm not paying attention, it'll get up to 800, and that's a little too hot. It's like dull orange, so
Yeah, that's a little warm.
avoid that. And this little ceiling here, got slots in here so the hot air rises through it. And I didn't get too much of the science into it, but it tells you how many pounds of wood to use in a certain time of year and that sort of thing. About 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, the fire's burned out. And like at the peak in January, I might get up 75, 77 for an hour or 2, and it'll be 68, 69 by the time I go to bed. And then I have to open the window to ventilate, which doesn't strike my sense of efficiency too well, but I thought it's nice to have a porch. And then the gnats eat you up in the spring. He doesn't like. He's real antisocial. Apparently, bobcats are really antisocial anyway. He's gotten used to people a little bit. This bobcat got hit by a car, and he's not quite full grown. Still young. I saw a stuffed bobcat. He was about 3 times that size.